Hi, and welcome to Let's Talk Bitcoin, a twice-weekly show about the ideas, people, and projects building the new digital economy and the future of money. Visit us at letstalkbitcoin.com for our daily guest blog, show archive, and of course, tipping options. My name is Adam B. Levine, and on today's show we're really digging in. Many of the people we talk to are fairly new to Bitcoin, discovering it and getting involved within the last year. They can see where they think things should go, but often don't have a lot of on-the-ground experience. Stephanie sat down with George Mandryk, an agorist merchant who's been accepting Bitcoins for more than 2 years, both from online sales and high-volume in-person events. Mandryk's perspective is a valuable one, and Stephanie's wide-ranging interview sits dead center in this episode. Later, I'm joined by both Stephanie Murphy and Andreas M. Antonopoulos to discuss the Satoshi Forest project by Bitcoin charity Sean's Outpost, the first Bitcoin ATM or vending machines if you prefer to hit the market, and what situations they make sense in. But first, what the heck is going on with the price spread between Mt. Gox and everybody else? We talk about it. Enjoy episode 41 of Let's Talk Bitcoin.
Hey Adam, Stephanie, what's the price of Bitcoin today? Oh, don't answer that. It's a rhetorical question. We have no idea. We have absolutely no clue.
It depends on who you ask, right?
Exactly. So price discovery was really easy when you had an exchange with, as they used to say, 80% of the volume of Bitcoin. Now we have 3 exchanges sharing about 80% of the volume of Bitcoin. That theoretically should offer better price discovery. Unfortunately, Mt. Gox is still at quite a difference from the other 2 exchanges. So this is a phenomenon that's developed over the last month, and I think it's rather interesting. We see this enormous spread in prices between Mt. Gox and the other exchanges. So why is this happening, and what does it mean for Bitcoin? What do you guys think?
I have a theory. I think the prices on each exchange is basically directly proportional to how difficult or easy it is to get fiat money in or out of the exchange. So for instance, with BTCE, which has like the lowest price in general for Bitcoin, it's difficult to get fiat into that exchange. It's kind of like arduous and like nobody wants to do it, maybe a little sketchy. As a result, the price of Bitcoin is really low. On the other hand, with Mt. Gox, you can get money into it, but good luck getting it out. There have been people waiting to get money out of fiat money, out of Mt. Gox for the longest time. So really their only option, if they have fiat in that exchange, is to buy Bitcoins and then withdraw the Bitcoins. That then drives the price of Bitcoin up. And then Bitstamp is sort of somewhere in the middle on both of those variables. So I think that's what's causing it. Any other ideas?
That's a great theory, Stephanie. I think what's interesting is what you're really saying is what we're seeing is really a discount on the value of dollars, and the dollars are being discounted depending on how hard it is to get them out of the exchange. It's not really affecting the price of Bitcoin except as a side effect, isn't it?
That's absolutely right. And it's kind of interesting because, a price is information. We want to know what the quote real price of Bitcoin is. And how do you actually know that when there are basically confounding variables, which is like, what's the fiat money doing on all these different exchanges?
So we're getting a bit more information in our price information. We're getting the price information of Bitcoin, but there's a bit more signal in that, the price information of the dollar and how difficult it is to get out of the exchange. Essentially, the market is giving us all the information there is in that price. Unfortunately, it's also giving us information about fiat difficulties that we don't necessarily want.
It's really hard to separate those, I guess, unless you look at the different exchanges and compare those, but even that's a little bit circuitous.
Well, for that, actually, I know you use the same service I use, bitcoinaverage.com. Bitcoinaverage.com takes a weighted average of a whole set of different exchanges and produce an average price. What's really interesting is they also have a little button that you can use to ignore the price of Gox as an outlier and then show only the others. And I've been running it with that enabled because I really do think that the real Bitcoin price is without the fiat difficulty signal in there. So the difference now is about $10 or $12. And I think that's rather interesting because it's $10 or $12 out of about 130, and it was more than $20 out of 100. So the difference has dropped almost by half.
Are you talking about the difference between Mt. Gox and then the next highest fiat money price of Bitcoin on an exchange?
Yes, right. I was calculating it based on the average with or without Mt. Gox, but it's almost the same really with what you just said.
And when you say that BitcoinAverage.com is a weighted average, what that means is they actually analyze the volume of trading on each exchange. And it's kind of handy. They'll show you the percentage of Bitcoins are being traded on which exchange. Maybe that didn't make sense, but they'll show you what percent of Bitcoin trading is being done on each exchange. So it's kind of useful if you want to look at that statistic too on the Bitcoin average chart.
Right, like the market share. So at the moment, it's showing Mt. Gox at about 53% of the total volume. Of course, that changes during the day. And it's rather interesting because all of these exchanges are operating on a 24/7 basis. You also see these geographical differences that have to do with who's awake and which population is primarily trading at that exchange.
One of the other factors in play here that I don't think you guys really are thinking about is that exchanges besides Mt. Gox, like BTCE and Bitstamp specifically, actually allow algorithmic trading to happen. So it's sort of natural that in these places where you can have essentially robots trading 24 hours a day, acting on very, very low-level signals, the volatility goes way down because, again, you've got these people waiting there to scoop up the couple of cents profit that they think that they can make in an automated fashion. So Mt. Gox, I don't believe, does that. They've got an order book where you can put orders on, and then as the price moves, it can queue through them. But that's a little bit of a different thing.
Right, exactly. So one of the mechanisms for smoothing out price volatility is algorithmic trading. So it can operate as a way to smooth out these bumps. Another way to smooth out these bumps is a practice called arbitrage, which is where humans who notice the difference in price between exchanges essentially take advantage of that by moving the commodity that's being traded from one exchange to the other, buying it where it's low and selling it where it's high. Unfortunately, arbitrage is not really possible to do, because you can do arbitrage here on the Bitcoin side. You can buy Bitcoin somewhere, move it, and then sell it somewhere else. But the way the arbitrage opportunity would work, essentially you'd be buying Bitcoin at one of the exchanges that's not Gox, and you'd be moving it into Gox, selling it there, and then you're stuck with dollars that you can't move. So that's the problem. That's why arbitrage isn't working at the moment, because you can't take the dollars back and repeat the process. Essentially, in an arbitrage way, you'd be able to move the dollars from Mt. Gox back to one of the other exchanges to repeat the cycle, buy Bitcoin again, etc. You can't do that.
Yeah, when you see a big spread like that, it means there's something that's disrupted, because naturally, if everything were fine and you could get money out of Gox and things like that, people would close that gap by taking advantage of those arbitrage opportunities. It only makes sense for people to do that. But the fact that they can't means that there is this big spread, and it's kind of like an interesting phenomenon.
You know, beyond that, the word on Twitter, and it's funny that we use Twitter as a source now, but there are a couple of people who are doing some interesting research into there and tracking order books and things like that. For all of Mt. Gox's faults, it does still get the periodic gigantic purchases going through it. And so that really has an effect, especially as volume is going down at that exchange overall. Those swings that you get from giant purchases of, you know, say a couple thousand Bitcoins or tens of thousands of Bitcoins really has a much more exaggerated effect than it would have had even 6 months ago.
It's not a problem if you're just sending money into the exchange and taking Bitcoin out, as long as you're verified or whatever and you can get the Bitcoins out. But it's a problem to go the other way.
Interestingly enough, you can actually calculate exactly how much the imbalance is. If you work out what the difference in price between the average Bitcoin price on the exchanges corresponds to by volume, you see that essentially Mt. Gox has about a $400,000 overhang. That means there's $400,000 more dollars in Gox than any of the other exchanges that you can't get out, which is affecting the price.
How does something like this resolve itself? Are we just waiting for Gox to essentially fix their banking relationships, and then the price will probably equalize because it'll be easier for people to, you know, do the arbitrage transactions, as opposed to now where you can go in one way, but it's much harder to get out the other way?
That's one possibility for this resolving itself. The other possibility is that this is an underlying liquidity problem, that it keeps getting worse and worse until it becomes greater than the ability of the organization to hide it, and then the entire thing explodes.
Let's assume for a second that Mt. Gox came out and told us exactly what was going on. Would we be able to believe them? I mean, is there any way to actually understand what's going on there, barring, you know, because Roger Ver, for example, went in and, you know, supposedly looked at all their books and vouched for him publicly. And yet there still is this problem, both in terms of the ability to get fiat currency out from that exchange, but also from apparently people being very concerned that there are liquidity problems. I mean, is there a way for Mt. Gox to address this without, you know, as we've talked about in the past, going with a complete transparency model?
No, not really.
I am not and have not been trading on Mt. Gox now for over 6 months. Are either of you guys using Mt. Gox at all anymore?
I haven't for 6 months or more now.
Yeah, I think my last time was maybe last February.
So let's talk about exchanges for a second then. For the show, we're using Coinbase. And then personally, I'm using BTCE for a couple of things because I wanted to play around with that idea of algorithmic trading. And then Bitstamp is another one that I've got an account at and that's looked like it would be potentially useful. You know, Coinbase has a real advantage in the US because it has such tight integration with like a bank account. But on the other hand, I just got a note from a listener this morning who was very, very upset. And he's had like $10,000 worth of Bitcoins essentially tied up with them in a transaction for a week and has been unable to get them to really give him any sort of feedback as to what the time frame is for getting that released or what's happening. And these are Bitcoin that have been confirmed sent to them, and yet for some reason they haven't made it happen. So are you guys having any good experiences, bad experiences with other exchanges that might be more worthwhile?
I'm having a great experience with local Bitcoins.
That's a great answer. And also with Buttonwood SF. By the way, John yesterday announced that the Buttonwood SF had a buyer's opportunity because there's a lot of people selling right now. So that's another way if you want to buy Bitcoin. I've got accounts on pretty much all of the exchanges. I use Coinbase. They've been convenient because they link to a bank account, but they've been having problems lately with being responsive. I think that tends to happen with a lot of the exchanges as they get overwhelmed with customer requests, and tiny little glitch will make all the phones ring. Someone's always disappointed because the phone didn't get answered quickly enough. I can understand if you've got $10,000 in Bitcoin missing for a week, that can be quite upsetting. So I also signed up recently for Kraken, which opened day before yesterday for the open beta. No volume there, no liquidity yet, obviously. Everybody's still trying to get verified and sign up. But interestingly enough, that's another big exchange that opened here in the US. So let's see.
And it opened against a backdrop of Trade Hill, closing, having a real problem with the Internet Archive Credit Union, and then winding up closing very shortly after having announced that plan was going on. I thought it was very interesting, the timing of that, that sort of disaster for Trade Hill and the opening for Kraken. And I wonder what it says about the possibilities, again, of continuing to do business, especially in places like San Francisco, where even though it's a very tech-friendly environment, clearly even banks that should be aligned are still under a lot of pressure to make sure that they're not doing business with Bitcoin exchanges.
Yeah, even the Internet Archive Union, which you would assume would have a lot of flexibility with its board, was unable to really fulfill that requirement. But hey, look at it from this perspective. 6 months ago when we were having this conversation, essentially we didn't have any choices. It was local Bitcoins or Mt. Gox. Today, we have at least 3 other working exchanges that have more than 10% or more than 5% of the liquidity or volume. So we do have some viable alternatives. There's at least 4 viable exchanges, and they're increasing. I think this is good stuff. Gradually, this is becoming less and less of a problem.
Let's talk about that price for a second, because you guys were talking about Bitcoin average or bit average, and then there's
BitcoinAverage.com.
Is it Bitcoin Average? I thought it was bitaverage.com. Maybe I'm thinking of the wrong one here.
BitcoinAverage.com.
Oh. Well, I use bitaverage.com. Are those different?
Yeah. BitAverage is lame.
Huh. Okay. Well, okay. Well, then there we go. Okay. Well, anyways.
Now you see where we're getting all this good data.
Yeah, I do. This does look better. I was wondering where the data was coming from for the other one. Okay. So I have another question. CoinDesk just launched their essentially price average. I don't recall what it's called, but they basically they're doing something very similar to what Bitcoin Average is doing, creating essentially a weighted price, and they're actually not including some of the smaller exchanges if they don't have certain volume requirements. And one of the other interesting exclusions was local Bitcoins. Based on the requirements that CoinDesk has put forward to be part of their average and their index, local Bitcoins really should be included in that, and yet they're not. So, I mean, do you think that there's a place for something like local Bitcoins in these averages, or do you think that a person-to-person price is different than a market price?
Aren't all market prices essentially person-to-person prices when you kind of break it down? The interesting thing about local Bitcoins is you can set your price any way you want. You can have Mt. Gox spot. You can have Mt. Gox plus 20%. You can have BTC-E price. You can have CampEX, anything you want. And really, the price of a Bitcoin is what someone is willing to pay for it. And so what better way to work that out than kind of directly from individual to individual? So absolutely, I think there's a place for exchanges like local Bitcoins in a Bitcoin average.
Local Bitcoins is in the bitcoinaverage.com average. Local Bitcoins is higher than the average, but still less than Gox. So essentially, you're reflecting 3 levels of difficulty. Get it easy on one of the exchanges that isn't Gox. Get it via local Bitcoins, where you have to go all the way to the cafe and you're paying a premium for that. Or get it by Gox, where you're likely to get Goxed and you're paying a double premium for that. Jesus.
I'm here with George Mandryk. Hey, welcome to Let's Talk Bitcoin.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
George is...
you can call me Mandryk.
It's weird to call you George. I know you as Mandryk. Mandryk is your nickname. And you have a business called George's Famous Baklava, right?
Yeah, it's actually just turned 4.
Oh, wow.
And I've been selling...
Is it potty trained yet?
Not yet, unfortunately.
Probably never will be.
Drips syrup everywhere.
What is George's Famous Baklava?
It's my website. I started as an agorist business that I began 4 years ago.
What is an agorist business for somebody who doesn't know that word?
I'm just basically doing my thing without asking for permission in the form of licenses or paying taxes or anything like that. It's just transactions I do between myself and my customers.
Nobody in your kitchen inserting themselves into that transaction, the same kitchen you feed your kids with, the same kitchen you feed yourself with, right?
Yep.
That's where you make George's Famous Baklava. So, yeah, I think it's cool. So you've been doing this for 4 years and selling baklava on the internet. And you were one of my earliest friends who found out about Bitcoin and really grabbed onto it and said, I would like to make this a part of my business.
I'd say about 2 years ago, almost 2 years now. Really, the appeal was the fact that there were less fees than PayPal. Initially, that was the best thing for it. And, I could be like, I could just turn these into dollars and I'd get more money than if I just sold, had an order through PayPal. I'd be able to keep more of the dollars. Initially, I didn't even really understand Bitcoin. And that was good enough for me at the start.
Well, in 2011, somebody buys a pan of baklava for 10 Bitcoins. You're sitting pretty good right now, right?
Actually, my first order was 14 Bitcoins.
Wow.
From Bitcoin Jesus himself.
That is a golden pan of baklava.
Yeah.
And you had been selling baklava on eBay before that, right? And so you were intimately familiar with things like PayPal.
No, actually, that was the first time. When I started putting my baklava on eBay, that was when I began the business. I put it on eBay as pretty much just like a advertisement, and it linked to my site. I mean, people buy from eBay, but I'd rather they buy directly from the website. But it helps. It doesn't hurt to have it on eBay.
But you probably had enough orders on eBay that you knew some of the problems that can come with PayPal, right?
Oh, yeah, right. Exactly. With PayPal, if somebody contests a purchase and for any reason, they're pretty much going to get a refund and you're going to be screwed out of the money. I mean, that's so my experience.
Take the baklava and run, eat it up and say, right. I never got it, right?
And I mean, and if a customer comes to me and says, hey, I didn't like this, pretty much I always give a refund. If somebody really didn't like what they purchased from me, I'm not gonna try to dispute it or anything. Hey, I'm sorry you didn't enjoy it. Here's, your money back. It's a cost of doing business kind of thing. But that doesn't happen often.
I've never seen anyone eat your food and not like it. Like your baklava is famous for a reason. Right. And you can see pictures of it if you go to your website, which is mandryk.com, MANDRIK.com. So you started using Bitcoin on your website in 2011. And what was your experience with it at first? Did you think, oh, this is cool? Or did you have some issues with it?
No, I thought it was cool. I didn't really understand it. I didn't really have a grasp of Bitcoin at the time. And like I said, I was just converting them. I was selling them on Mt. Gox and depositing back into my Dwala account in cash, at least initially.
Oh, that was back when you could do that.
Yeah.
When you could get money out of Mt. Gox and when you could use Dwala with Mt. Gox.
It was so much easier in these days. I mean, Bitcoins were like $6 each or something like that. And at the time, I didn't have a full understanding of Bitcoin. I didn't know what I know now. But once I did, over time, within a few weeks, a couple months, I was learning more and more, and I started to realize I want to keep these. These are really cool. I want to use them for other things too, not just hold on to them because I think they're going to be worth more, but because it's just a really cool currency. I mean, It's a great way to do business. Now it's turned into my favorite way to be paid. Before I was really into silver, and I'm not so convinced on that anymore as a currency.
Yeah, I want to hear more about your thoughts on silver. And also, I know you have some thoughts on point of sale systems and how they might integrate with Bitcoin and like merchants using Bitcoin. And I want to talk about all those things. But first, I'm curious, when you first started out, how many of your customers were paying with Bitcoin? Like, what was the percentage, would you say?
It was small. I mean, people weren't using it that often, I don't think. There weren't that many businesses that were accepting it.
Did you ever get emails saying, like, what the hell is Bitcoin?
Not really. I mean, I didn't really have a lot of people asking me how to use it or anything like that. I can't really recall anybody reaching out to me like that. It seemed like people who were asking about Bitcoin already knew, and they were excited that I was accepting it, and they wanted to pay me in that. It was initially a small number, and obviously my Bitcoin business has grown since then.
At this point in 2013, like, what percentage of your orders come in and they're paying in Bitcoin now?
Probably like 20-25%.
Okay.
Something like that. It's still not the majority.
It's still not the majority,
No.
but you are getting a steady supply of Bitcoins coming in for orders. And, that's one of the things that we've talked about on the show before is like, people write us and ask, well, how do I get Bitcoins? I don't feel like buying them. I don't want to make an account on one of these exchanges. And one way to get Bitcoins without doing all that is to basically work for them or sell a product where you get Bitcoins in return. And so that's one thing that you've done.
Yeah, that was really how I got interested in, when I became really interested in Bitcoin, that was the easiest way for me to acquire more. If I could use my labor, or my time to acquire Bitcoins rather than just trading cash for them, that was the way to go for me. And that worked out pretty well. It may seem like it's a little harder now because of the value of Bitcoin. It's not $6 per Bitcoin like it was when I first started. Mm-hmm. But I don't know. I still think it's worth it to work for Bitcoin, and it's still the way I want to be paid. I want 100% of my income to be in Bitcoin. That's where I'd like to go.
Yeah, and I think maybe you've been going in that direction, which is really cool. But I just want to back up the train for a minute and say you're being really humble. Our listeners may not know you well unless they've been maybe to the Porcupine Freedom Festival. You were pretty famous for being the best food vendor at the Porcupine Freedom Festival at PorcFest, which is a liberty freedom festival that happens every summer in the woods of New Hampshire. You had a food stand there for the past, 3 or 4 years?
This was the 4th year.
Yep. Okay, so in June of this year, that was the 4th year. And you are since retired from cooking at PorcFest, but you had a very professional operation. I mean, like, you're a chef. You've worked in restaurants your whole life. You've had this baklava business for 4 years. You've been doing food stands at camping festivals and stuff like that. And so you've also dealt with a lot of libertarians who go to these festivals and they want to pay in silver and alternative currencies and silver dimes and maybe even Bitcoin. What was your experience, I guess, with that? Like, how did alternative payments kind of evolve for you as you ran your food stand from one year to the next at the Porcupine Freedom Festival?
It's a good question because it really did change every year. I mean, our first year, the first couple of years, we were still really excited about silver because it's a team of us that make it happen, that made the stand happen, and it grew every year because it's just the work involved was incredible. Not one person could do that. It's insane. We just put it together, and it was a success every year for sure, and it just got bigger and bigger. But it started out, I'd say we loved silver. We were big fans of taking silver, any kind. It didn't matter.
Why did you love silver?
Well, I mean, I was still... There weren't really a lot of other options. If you looked before Bitcoin grew...
Was it just because it was an alternative to the government fiat money?
Right, and it was a way to do business outside of the dollar. And, if the dollar collapsed, silver, you feel like silver has this intrinsic value that, it's worth something because it's silver. It's been used for thousands of years. Or, same with gold. It has that for it. That was really, I loved it. I had the silver bug for many years. And as PorcFest grew, as our stand grew and Bitcoin became bigger, the more interested I became in Bitcoin, the more I realized, hey, this is really the way I want to be paid at the stand. Silver took a back seat because you can't. You all know the reasons why. You can't sit there and trade silver with somebody across the world in a fraction of a second or whatever. It just doesn't work like that with silver or even with cash. Crossing borders with silver, crossing borders with cash. It's one of those things that you just can't do. In huge amounts.
Yeah, there were a lot of people who came to the Porcupine Freedom Festival from Canada, for instance. For them, bringing those things across the border would be really difficult. But with something like Bitcoin, it would be absolutely no problem.
Right. I mean, you could have a brain wallet, and they're not going to know at customs,
Yeah, exactly. They can't search your brain just yet. Yeah.
No, not yet.
Okay, so how did that happen for you? Like when you noticed people were starting to buy more of your stuff with Bitcoins?
Well, 2012 was the first year we accepted Bitcoin, and I think the rate at the time was like $6 and change, maybe. That was the year that I was all aboard on Bitcoin. That's really when there were panels, alternative currency panels, that I had the opportunity to ask questions on, and they had one where they didn't even have really a representative of Bitcoin there. And, I kind of pointed out all the flaws I saw with other alternative currencies, like at the time, what were they, like dime cards and silver in general.
For people who don't know, a dime card there are people who take silver dimes like Mercury dimes or pre-1965 dimes which contain some percentage of silver. They're U.S. issued dimes. And then they'll put them in a card with like an image, or usually it's like some kind of graphic that's like really...
There's information on them that tell you about the value. They're pretty cool. I mean, they're neat things. They're educational tools, I think so.
Mm-hmm. And it's laminated, so you can trade it kind of like a trading card, but it has a dime in it. And, in the past, there was it 2010 or 2011? A couple years ago, silver was on a spike during that summer that PorcFest was happening. It hit like $50 for an ounce of silver. These dime cards were going around, and people were wanting $5, $8, $10 for one of these silver dimes in a card.
I'm sure they got it for some of them. I mean,
they did, yeah.
They had a premium on them, and people liked them. But that's the thing with silver at a thing like that. Like, people bring their silver to PorcFest because they think it's a cool thing. It's a novelty, though, in my opinion. It's great to use as payment at festivals like that, but it just doesn't work.
You can do that, right?
It just doesn't work on a bigger scale. Not in my opinion. I mean, if peer-to-peer it works okay, in person, it can work. People can decide to do that. But, any kind of barter can, really. But realistically, in the world, when, you're doing online sales and stuff, it just doesn't work. Because it's like, okay, ship me this silver, and then, pay all this money, have it come registered mail because it's silver. And if it gets lost, that sucks.
Oh, yeah.
So there's just all these pains in the butts with dealing with it. It's not like that with Bitcoin. It's just not like, it's just not there like that. So...
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
So the first year, the first year we started accepting Bitcoin, 2012, we had maybe 15 transactions, and we also got a bunch of physical Bitcoins at the time.
And how were people paying at that time? Did they have like bit bills, or were they sending it with their phone out in the woods where there's no internet?
Well, it was either some people had rolls of the original Casasius physical Bitcoins, and we got some of those. I remember getting 2 for a $10 sandwich and being told to keep the change.
Wow,
that was pretty cool.
And then later on, they were like going for $10,000 on eBay.
Nah, I don't know about that. Not the singles.
Not the singles.
I think they were like 1,000 some.
Yeah.
At the most, maybe. When it was when Bitcoins were really spiking high.
That is a damn good sandwich.
yeah. So I mean, there was that, but we only did maybe between 15 and 20 transactions at the most in Bitcoin in 2012, and that was I think we got like 60 some Bitcoins, something like that, which wasn't a lot at the time. It was like $6 a Bitcoin, and then this year we did about 180 transactions in Bitcoin. So there was a lot of growth. Now it still wasn't the majority; it was still a small minority of business. But that's how much we took in, and people were way more interested in dealing in Bitcoin this year than they were the last, and it's going to grow every year, in my opinion. I mean, I don't know, because this is my last year cooking there, but I'm sure lots of stands, they need to accept Bitcoin because people want to pay in that way.
You were famous because you get really creative with your food. Like when you're cooking at the Porcupine Freedom Festival, okay, we all know libertarians love bacon, right? And so you have these sandwiches that's like weaved bacon that's baked in an oven, and it's like a mat of bacon with gyro meat and vegetables inside of it, rolled up, covered in cheese.
We pretty much
fries.
did. We pretty much use bacon weaves for everything, omelets, whatever. It's a great way to eat. It's a lot of fun, and that's what I like to do when I cook. I cook for fun at home. I like to cook for friends, and I like to do different things. When my girlfriend was in town, she's Canadian, she was visiting last week, I would just be like, tell me something you want and I'll make it. I don't care. Like that's how I am with cooking. It's It's a lot of fun for me, especially on a smaller scale at home. It's different. The festival, it's still fun, but it's a lot of work. It can be very overwhelming.
I think that's cool that you have so much fun with it. You were saying that it gets overwhelming when you're cooking at PorcFest, and you had some people that you hired temporarily for the week to help out with the stand. Can you tell me about like how they were paid? Like, did they want to get paid in Bitcoins as time went on?
Yeah, the whole team was awesome. They were great people that worked there at the stand this year.
From sun up to sundown.
Yeah, it was insane.
After midnight,
It was everybody who worked there was needed, but I think we ended up paying out mostly in cash because it costs money to get there. Most people are coming in from out of town. I mean, everybody who was working for us was, so they need recoup some costs with cash. But some, when it's portion paid in silver or portion paid in Bitcoin. I mean, that option's always open. It's like that's what I ask them. I'm like, just tell me what you want to be paid in, and we'll arrange that. That's fine. Like I said, I'm somebody who wants to be paid in Bitcoin at all times, and that's really what I've been going for. And I'm at a point now where that's pretty much how I get paid, other than PayPal sales from Baklava. I just had some news that's about a day old where I just started working with blockchain.info. Roger Ver reached out to me, and I just started with them just today, pretty much yesterday, whatever.
Doing customer support kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, I worked with BitInstant for a few months, and that was really fun. I really enjoyed it. I love working in the Bitcoin world, and honestly, it's really what I want to be able to do. I like being able to do a job like that from anywhere, talking about the thing that one of the things that I love the most, Bitcoins, and working with amazing people who have been a huge part of why Bitcoin is what it is today. Like, that's just an amazing opportunity.
Hi, this is Jason King, founder at Sean's Outpost, and you are listening to Let's Talk Bitcoin. Sean's Outpost is a homeless outreach in Pensacola, Florida, and we are proudly powered by Bitcoin. To date, over 13,000 meals have been fed to the homeless in our area, all purchased with Bitcoin and through the generosity of the cryptocurrency community. Read more about us at seansoutpost.com. Food, shelter, Bitcoin, everybody. Sean'sOutpost.com.
EasyDNS is the Swiss Army knife for your domain names, helping meet their customers' individual needs since 1998. EasyDNS has been an outspoken critic of SOPA and CISPA. EasyDNS was an early supporter of Bitcoin, and now they are proud to sponsor this show. Do business with a company that shares your values. Get a 13% discount when you pay with Bitcoin. Go to bitcoin.easydns.com and be sure to use discount code LTB. Okay, so we talked about some of the things that you like about Bitcoin and doing business with it, and we talked about silver kind of being a novelty.
Yeah, can I talk about the things I hate about Bitcoin?
Yeah. What do you hate about Bitcoin?
Nothing. No. Yeah, that's we were talking before this interview. I said I wanted to talk about how transactions with Bitcoin are not where they need to be yet.
Yes, that's exactly where I was going. Go have at it. Tell me your ideas, because you're a merchant. You've worked a lot with people paying for stuff at a physical location,
right, or
on an online store with Bitcoin, and you've experienced some ways that you think it could be made better. So, tell me about that.
Well, I think in general, before I get specific, I think in general, it's just using Bitcoin is not easy yet. It is not easy. It's at the point now where you really kind of need to understand what you're doing before you do it, because it's very unforgiving. It's so easy to just lose Bitcoins if you don't know what you're doing. Just looking at the general picture, it needs to get to the place where you don't really need to understand everything. There's a system in place, or there's multiple systems in place that just make it incredibly easy to pay in Bitcoin. And
I've heard a lot of people say this buzzword of we're going to make an app that makes it so your grandma can use Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, that's really what needs to happen, right? I mean, God, make her stop paying with a check at the grocery store. Come on, who still does that? I still see that. It's insulting. No, but I'd like to say now, Bitcoin's kind of at the point where credit cards were when they were just the manual. What are they? The little metal things that you would. Yeah.
Yeah, where you take literally an imprint of the credit
the manual
card.
Imprinters. That's what they were called.
And
that's what I like to say Bitcoin's at right now. And I had actually talked about this on another podcast recently. I compared it to when I was in New York City in April. I spent a week there. I was going to Starbucks every morning to get some coffee, and I noticed people were in line to buy coffee, and they were just instantly paying with their phones. They were just holding up a QR code, and it was getting scanned. This incredibly packed Starbucks in Lower Manhattan, and the line is just moving faster than I've ever seen someplace that busy moving. It was crazy, and I'm like, what are they doing? How are they paying? I didn't know if it had like a credit card link to it or whatever, but it turns out it's just a gift card. They have an account, and they have an app, and it's apparently Starbucks how. It's the number one way they do business now with people. It's like their number one way that people pay at Starbucks is they just buy these gift cards. They have an account, and they just scan the code, and it's done. And I'm like, wow, this is where Bitcoin needs to get to. You're right, like because now even at PorcFest, when we would do a Bitcoin transaction, we had a point of sale system, a computerized system, and we had a second monitor facing the customers with some information, and it's just basically the blockchain page with the QR code people could scan. And right now, it'd be like, oh, it's, when people pay in cash, it'd be really quick. I could use a cash register very fast, and here's your change. But it's like everything would slow down with the Bitcoin order. Now, granted, the internet there is pretty slow, but it's still clunky, the process where they scan the code and then they put in the number, and then they, whatever. Like, okay, wait for a zero confirmation, for unconfirmed transaction.
You had one QR code that was your Bitcoin address for the festival, right? It wasn't like each item on the menu had a specific QR code, right?
We would just give them the total in dollars. I mean, the system we had wasn't really the best either, right? Like, I think the only company that has a POS system that incorporates Bitcoin for restaurants is BitPay, but they just wouldn't really work for what we needed at the stand. I don't know, like there needs to be a better way to do it. What we just had a POS that you could just accept cash. I could create gift cards. And actually that's what I advise people to do at PorcFest was, hey, if you want to pay in Bitcoin, buy a gift card up front, a certain amount or whatever, and then, we just have a balance on your account.
That is exactly what I did. And I ate all week for a couple Bitcoins.
And it was fast, right? You weren't slowing down to make a transaction every time you wanted totally a sandwich fast. Or whatever.
Like a fast bat.
Breadless sandwich. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it was great. So how did you figure out, like, if somebody wanted to pay you with Bitcoin and they had the Bitcoin on their phone and they hadn't purchased a gift card, how would you orchestrate that? Like, how did you make sure that they actually paid? Because you're waiting for the transaction to confirm. Like, what if they try to send it and then there's no cell phone signal and then they walk away and it kind of gets lost?
It kind of happened like that. Now, like I said, PorcFest is the worst place in the world for internet, I think. In the first world, anyways. But where they have it, it's like all these people want to pay in Bitcoin, and the internet signal is just awful because you're in the middle of nowhere, northern New Hampshire, up in the mountains. But we would once we saw the unconfirmed transaction, that was good enough. Because most of the people paying in Bitcoin, it's like I know them. I'm either on Facebook friends with them or whatever.
So if their transaction got lost, you could send them a Facebook message and say, hey, give me my money. Yeah,
and there were some people who had cell signal issues, and they would come back an hour later like, hey, it went through, here it is. And I'm like, okay, that's cool, thanks. But yeah, I was just basically telling them the cash price, and then they would just put it in, the dollar amount, and it would convert it to Bitcoin in their app. But that's not really the solution either. I mean, ideally, I'd love it for just things to be tied to the Bitcoin rather than the dollar. I think that's a whole other thing. That's a whole other story. Like, that's difficult to do right now.
Yeah, that's going to take a while. I haven't even really seen signs of that happening too much.
Right, and that's fine. That's not really the biggest concern. The biggest concern is figuring out a way where it's just easy. I mean, this is like, I think BitPay's system works better in a restaurant where it's not just like this line of people rushing to get in, to get their order in and then get the next order and get the next order. Mm-hmm. That's a whole different system for Bitcoin orders. It needs to be like where Starbucks is with their orders now. But it's not like they started business with doing that. I mean, that took years to develop.
I can see that maybe Starbucks had a real necessity for that. They did have certain locations that were always just super packed. Right,
but they do that everywhere. And apparently this app even notifies you when you're near Starbucks. Like, you can enable that on your phone.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's smart. But, like, I mean, I'm just thinking, how easy would that be to do with Bitcoin? Like, you could have your own personal account and you could just send Bitcoin to it to fund it. And then, like, when you go to Starbucks, it takes 0.02 or whatever for your cup of coffee, right?
Yeah. And that's the thing. Like, once companies... we want companies to take Bitcoin. It would be awesome if Starbucks, we accept Bitcoin now. That would be incredible. But maybe they need to come up with a system or whatever. But the thing with Bitcoin, at least, is people can come up with systems. There's so many different people who work figuring out ways to do transactions with Bitcoin that somebody's going to come up with something that can be used across the board, or just make the process of buying something with Bitcoin easier, that other companies can incorporate into their own structure and have something that just works for them. I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of different options.
As you said that, I was just imagining like going through, for instance, like a fast food drive-through. You could take a lot of the person work out of that. You know what I mean? Like you could automate a lot of it. Like picture driving up to a menu and each item has a little QR code or something like that you scan, and then you just send whatever amount of Bitcoin to that QR code with your phone, and then it shows up somewhere, bing, inside the restaurant, and somebody makes your food, and then like you're done. You already ordered and paid for it in the same step.
Well, I think what would even be better, it would be a touchscreen where there's a lot of places, gas stations, like Sheetz is a big one, in Pennsylvania and Ohio, where you walk into this gas station and they have made to order food, and they have monitors, a bunch of monitors lined up on the outside. A lot of places have these, and you just put in your order. If a QR code popped up right there with your total, it's this many Bitcoins. You just scan your phone on it, beep, prints a receipt out, and you're done. People start making it then. Or even with like the drive-through thing, even if there's a person there, you place your order and then the screen's there where the QR code comes up for your total. By the time you drive up to the window, kind of thing. There's a lot of different scenarios where that would work. There's so many different ways that you could do it, where that would all be great.
I just heard yesterday about some kind of technology where you have some app on your phone or something like that, and it's got Bitcoins on it, and it's like basically any liquid that you would want to come out of a tap, like gasoline or even like water or beer or whatever. And, you just kind of scan it and then fill up a cup, and then it like charges you for that amount of liquid. So like, yeah, there's just endless applications for Bitcoin. And like you said, we're at the very beginning of that kind of technology and how it could be made more user-friendly and better, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you look at where Bitcoin was a year ago, it's incredible how much has grown. That's the thing. The growth's going to happen. I mean, I really don't see how it's not. And it really is only going to take one huge company to get on board for it to really explode. I mean, people are kind of just... Right now, what is it like? Most businesses that accept it are smaller scale, I guess, right? Is there really any huge corporation that's taking Bitcoin right now?
Well, I mean, don't forget George's famous baklava.
Oh, yeah.
It's a multinational corporation. No, just kidding.
Yeah, I got 4 orders yesterday.
But yeah, no, you're right. I mean, there really isn't the mainstream kind of jumping on board with it yet, but I think there will be, right? eBay's talking about it now,
There's a lot of talk right now. I mean, it's still early. I know people like to say that. But it's true. It really is. And their growth needs to happen, but it's going to happen very fast. And it's been happening very fast. And, I mean, it's the internet. What do you expect, right?
From a technical standpoint, one of the things that I often think about is like Bitcoin escrows, for instance. On local Bitcoins, if you're buying or selling Bitcoins, the seller can put the Bitcoins into an escrow, right?
Right.
And then basically the Bitcoins go into this escrow address and then they get confirmed or whatever. And they're already in there, right? And then once the seller sends the release code, they get immediately dumped into the buyer's wallet and they're like instantly accessible. And they don't have to wait for that confirmation for whatever reason because it's already been confirmed in one place or whatever. So I could envision that kind of a system, kind of taking the waiting time for that first confirmation out of Bitcoin payments. Like if you had, for instance, almost like an escrow account where that's your Starbucks gift card and you put Bitcoins in there, like Starbucks kind of already has them, you know what I mean? And it's just like a few BitCents get dumped into their account like every time you buy a cup of coffee.
Yeah, just like it's basically like internal transactions.
Yeah, and maybe a lot of that would happen like off blockchain, right?
Right.
Because that would be the way to like do the speed a little bit faster. But, speed is something that could really be super taken advantage of about Bitcoin.
You can buy it on the Silk Road.
You can buy what on the Silk Road?
Speed.
Oh.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry.
You can do that. But I mean, potentially Bitcoin transactions could be really fast, really frictionless. That's what Bitcoin does best, right? Yeah. We just need to get it there.
It just needs to get better. and it's going to. I mean, I really believe it is. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a Bitcoin expert or whatever, but I don't know. I just look at where it's gone, and it's like I don't really see it stopping anytime soon. I'd be blown away if that happened. You like to hear when people talk about it. They're like, well, I'm not saying it's to invest everything into it, and it's very volatile or whatever. And I get why they say that, but at the same time, I don't know. I really think I see it as the future of currency. At least right now, it sure seems like it. Get ready, buy now.
Get ready, here it comes.
Yeah, and if I'm wrong, you can sue me and I'll pay you in Bitcoin. if it turns out to be a flop.
All right, he's promised it. Yeah. So, and you are putting your money where your mouth is on that. You are a person who's really in Bitcoin for the long term.
Yeah, I mean, I'm getting paid in it. I'd love to be able to buy groceries with it, and there's still a lot of things where I don't want to just. We were talking about this off mic. It's like I don't want to just be able to buy a gift card from someplace necessarily, or from a third party who's just buying those gift cards with cash. After I give them Bitcoins and then shipping me gift cards. Like I want to be able to just use use Bitcoins to just pay a company directly. Like here's your Bitcoins. Let me have the whatever in exchange for the goods or service. Mm-hmm. Like I really want to see that with common things like grocery stores, gas stations. Things you spend money on every day. Starbucks, if you buy coffee. I usually make my own, but whatever. Just things like that. That's the next step, and I think it's going to get there sooner than later.
Wouldn't it be cool if you could go to the grocery store and, like, how sometimes you pay with a debit card and you can get cash back or whatever? Right. Wouldn't it be cool if you could get Bitcoin back or something like that?
Why not, right?
Yeah, or if you could actually buy Bitcoins at the grocery store, or you could change your Bitcoins into dollars or whatever. I mean, that would be cool.
Yeah. It's all possibilities. It's able to happen. It just needs to get there. Like there's no reason to think that couldn't happen. But yeah, you look at where credit card payments, see how far they've come, and it's pretty incredible how it started out. It's not going to take that long for Bitcoin to grow, I don't think, not by any means.
No, it's been exponentially accelerated by the internet and just the growth of technology. That's the pace that we're operating at these days, and it's just going to get more and more exciting. Before we end up the interview, tell me your predictions for next year. I mean, I know you're retired from the Porcupine Freedom Festival, but what do you think Bitcoin's going to look like next year?
PorcFest? Or in
no,
general?
Just like we'll pick the arbitrary point of like next summer or next fall.
I think anybody who pretends to know really doesn't know, because it's such a huge picture thing. I mean, there's a lot of people in Bitcoin that are big players in it. I don't know. Like, how can you even predict it at this point? Just looking at how much it's grown and just the growth around the world, because it's not just like this small market. There's just people everywhere getting interested in it because of a lot of it has to do with governments and their fiat and their currency taking a dump, and they feel there's more security in Bitcoin depending on where they live. So I don't know. I think this time next year, I hope to see. I'd like to see a couple of major players accepting Bitcoin like that. I think that would be a huge success if by this time next year there are big companies like eBay or PayPal or whatever taking Bitcoin. That would be incredible. And I really hope it happens, and I think it will. Well, it's only a matter of time. There's so many places out there. It's only a matter of time till one of them or a handful of them start accepting Bitcoin at this rate.
And what do you think about what the government decides to do with Bitcoin? Like what the U.S. government, how they decide to treat Bitcoin, is that going to matter to you?
No, it's not. I mean, it's really not. They can try everything they want, and I think the U.S. could get left behind in a lot of ways. With the government making it really hard for people to buy Bitcoins. I'm sure the U.S. I can't imagine the U.S. not cracking down in some way, trying to take control by limiting exchanges in some way, or who they deal with, the banks they deal with. I mean, we've already seen it, and I think that's going to happen. It's going to continue to happen. But in other countries, it's not going to be that way. And a lot of places, they're a lot more Bitcoin friendly. Now, maybe they're not friendly in other ways, but I mean, realistically, I don't think that's going to stop the growth of Bitcoin. It might affect companies who decide to get involved. I mean, obviously it will.
Yeah,
I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what does happen with that. Is it just going to be like this kind of geo arbitrage where Bitcoin businesses and the real innovation is kind of positioning itself in places that are politically more friendly to Bitcoin? It's
going to be a roller coaster, and it's going to be fun to watch. It's been fun the past couple of years, and it's only getting more exciting. In my opinion, I love it.
Awesome. Well, Mandrik, thank you so much for chatting with me today. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, thanks.
Tell us where people can find George's famous baklava and where they can hear more from you.
You can't find it at PorkFest anymore.
You're retired.
Yeah.
That's right.
You can find mandrik.com, mandrik.com.
Cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So if people have been listening to the show, they know that we, and particularly I, am interested in Bitcoin-based charitable work and nonprofit organizations. One of the organizations that people have probably heard of, it's becoming really well known in the Bitcoin community, is Sean's Outpost, which is an advocacy organization for homeless people. It is run by Jason King in Pensacola, Florida. You know, they've had some real issues, kind of like a Habitat for Humanity, where they're building homes. They're also providing food against the local laws because it's illegal actually to distribute any kind of food in like a park or in the city where they're doing this. And they do all kinds of projects like that. But recently, he's really taken it up a notch with this project called Satoshi Forest, where basically Jason has rented a plot of land with Bitcoins and has basically people who would otherwise be homeless camping on this land. And now it is private property. So they don't have to face these laws, which basically make it illegal to be homeless in the city. And it's really fascinating. I wonder where this is going to go. He's got a lot of people, I think, camping on this land so far. So have you guys heard about this? What do you think?
He's actually not renting it. They actually bought the property, and the payment, I think it's $600 US a month that they're doing, is actually a mortgage payment. The interesting part about this, of course, is that the company that the land has been purchased from is actually a multi-state real estate company. Sean's Outpost isn't accepting Bitcoin, then converting it to dollars and then paying the mortgage with it. They're actually paying in Bitcoin for the mortgage. And as a result of that interaction that Jason King had with them, they're actually accepting Bitcoin for all of their properties in a couple of different states. So that's really exciting too. All of these things are like on their face. If you just look at just what's happened, then maybe it's not that important. I mean, this is really cool, and it's really been interesting to watch Jason progress in the Bitcoin community, certainly, and his cause gain name recognition as it has, because like when you go on Reddit and there's a post that's been made by Sean's Outpost, chances are really good it's not only going to be getting a lot of upvotes, in addition to that, they're getting a lot of donations through the Bitcoin tip system that's built into Reddit now. It's really cool watching this stuff, and again, you can see how even though this is a project that he did for a specific reason, it's already having knock-on effects elsewhere where people, I mean, it's really cool to see. I'm excited about this one.
Their very first mortgage payment was paid entirely from tips that came through the Reddit bot, all $600. That's very exciting. I think what they're doing at Sean's Outpost, what Jason's doing, is spectacular. It's inspiring. We need to create an award just for this kind of thing, really contributing the most to the Bitcoin community and give them some recognition, because this is really impressive.
Yeah. So what kind of effects do you think this is going to have on, I don't know, real estate and like projects that people can do? Like if you could buy land from a multi-state real estate company and use Bitcoins to do that, what possibilities does that open up?
I think that one of the main ones that jumped out at me about this is that they didn't buy land with Bitcoin. They're paying a mortgage with Bitcoin. So what we've seen so far is we've seen people asking for fixed rates payable in Bitcoin. And that's kind of a scary thing to do. If you're going to spend, $100,000 right now worth of Bitcoin, then that means that you've spent all of that upfront and it's like a problem. But for a deflationary currency, it makes a ton of sense to pay your mortgage in it when the amount is not denominated in it, because that means that over time, the amount of Bitcoin, relatively speaking, that they'll have to pay, assuming that the price goes up because adoption continues at the pace that we've sort of seen, that amount, relatively speaking, goes down. So they see a savings if they have the Bitcoins in advance.
Right. So they could be paying 1 Bitcoin for their mortgage payment, years on into the future. And that would be great for an organization like Sean's Outpost, who's a charity, and they're basically trying to save and have this long-term vision.
Especially when you factor endowments into this. I mean, that's the real, Stephanie, you run FreeAid, and I mean, you guys wind up with more Bitcoin than you need to spend on operation right then. And so it's in your best interest with the deflationary currency to basically just hold on to it, because you know that since you don't need it now, and it's probably going to go up in price, relatively speaking, you'll be able to use it for more later. So, I mean, it really incentivizes spending what you need when you need it. And Bitcoin's very good for that. But it also incentivizes not spending more than you need, because the advantage of holding on to it means you'll have more resources to work with later.
There are several organizations right now who are trying to build up Bitcoin endowments, basically so that they'll be able to use interest on those to do future kinds of charitable work, including the Lifeboat Foundation, which is kind of like a think tank for progression of humankind. They have like a Bitcoin wing also. It's interesting. And then also BitGive, which is a project that's associated with BitPay. And they're trying to build up like a big Bitcoin endowment so that they can use it in the future to do Bitcoin charitable work.
I think that the idea of an award is a really, really good one, and definitely something that we should think about how we want to do, because this is, a big part of what we're trying to do with Let's Talk Bitcoin is, of course, do this whole shining examples, horrible warnings thing. And we talk about horrible warnings way more than we talk about shining examples, because it seems like so many companies just figuring it out. And so they're making all of these really basic mistakes, like, for example, not communicating so people assume the worst. This is like a really basic marketing 101 thing. The worst thing to do under most circumstances is to stop talking to people when they're thinking that you're doing something wrong. That further reinforces the point.
I've done these for years as part of my analyst work. And we had, nice events, nice hotel, buffets, cocktails, announcement speeches, opening envelopes, and handing crystal awards to various people. The trick, I think, to make it good is to do it for individuals and not companies, to recognize individuals, not companies. Companies become sponsorship, whereas with individuals, you can do it more comfortably.
And I think that in Bitcoin, that makes it all the sense in the world. Again, it's a person-to-person environment, so this makes a ton of sense. Yeah. Well, that's great. Let's develop that more off the air.
More than 300,000 users and counting trust blockchain.info. It's a Bitcoin wallet service and a wealth of Bitcoin information, and it's completely free to use. With a blockchain.info wallet, you'll get the convenience of a web wallet and the security of a desktop client. Blockchain.info is also a block explorer. You can use it to see Bitcoin transactions in real time, check the balance of any Bitcoin address, and view many handy Bitcoin charts, all for free. See what they have to offer today at blockchain.info. Hi, Stephanie here. Would you like to turn your book into an enthralling audiobook? Need a persuasive commercial to promote your company? How about a narrator for your explainer video? Here's where I can help. I'm a freelance voiceover artist, and since 2009, I've lent my voice to dozens of audio projects. To hear some examples of my work, check out my website, smvoice.info. If you like what you hear, I'd love to be the voice of your next project. Get in touch at smvoice.info.
We first saw Bitcoin ATMs, or Bitcoin vending machines, as some of the manufacturers like to call them, at the Bitcoin 2013 conference in San Jose this past May. Now in September, the first couple of those have started to release. First the Lamassu vending machine, and then also the RoboCoin Bitcoin ATM, which is, they actually call theirs an ATM, whereas Lamassu prefers to talk about it as a vending machine. These are looking like they're going to get some traction, but they're moving into a really uncertain legal environment. And so, do you think that in the US or in other places around the world, this is the start of the accessible Bitcoin buying experience? Or is this just more technology that if we could just use it as technology, then it'd be great, but because there are rules that need to be followed, it's less useful?
Well, the uncertain regulatory environment is precisely the reason why a lot of these companies, Lamassu in particular, like to refer to themselves as a Bitcoin vending machine. If they were to make it a place where you could exchange Bitcoin and fiat kind of both ways, they would be subject to a lot of these laws that govern ATMs, and they don't want to do that. And so they just make it a one-way machine, and now it's a Bitcoin vending machine. And, I think that's probably a smart move because there were a few people who literally tried to make Bitcoin ATMs. They were clunky. There were security issues. It has to be very large and difficult to walk away with. And also there's the regulatory stuff that really slows people down. So it kind of makes sense to have just a one-way thing where you can buy Bitcoins and it's at like a bar or something where somebody can keep an eye on it. I think it's exciting. And if it's not allowed in the US, it'll flourish in other places.
That's the key. There's 192 countries out there. And if it's not allowed in the US, who cares? Listen, I mean, this is a device that could easily be exported and be used. I expect to see these pop up in places like Germany and Berlin and Bratislava and other places in Europe where Bitcoin is more comfortably regulated, and then also in places around the world outside of Europe. The key here, I think, is to realize that you're not really going to make a ton of money from fees or by having this machine in your premises. You're going to make money from foot traffic. So if this attracts customers to your business that wouldn't otherwise come, I think that's some great advertising. And certainly Bitcoin has shown that as this early adoption phenomenon, it does tend to attract a lot of publicity and a lot of free marketing for companies. I think that's where the advantage of having something like a Lamassu vending machine in your business comes from. And I think it's going to be a big success outside of the US before it's successful in the US. It's really smart of them to name it a vending machine to see how far they can go.
With the Lamassu machine, they actually, if I understand it correctly, allow the individual franchisees or whatever, the people who own a machine can set their own fees on that particular machine. So maybe some people will try to make money off of fees. Maybe some people will just go for the foot traffic. And it'll be really interesting to see what happens to the fees. I mean, I could even imagine Bitcoin prices being subsidized in a way, like if a machine attracts a lot of foot traffic and people buy different items because they went in to use the Bitcoin vending machine, then maybe they get their Bitcoins at a discount or something like that.
I don't think you're really going to make your money up on fees because the cost of the machine is still quite high. It's going to take quite a lot of volume production for the cost of the machines themselves to drop so that the fees make sense. But the foot traffic should help in the meantime, so that will work out.
It really depends on what type of market you find yourself in. Because if we're talking about a market right now where the easiest option is to find a Satoshi Square or a local Bitcoin, or, none of those things, if it's simply not available, I still very much struggle to find people who are interested in buying or selling Bitcoin within, 30 miles of me. And I'm only an hour and a half north of San Francisco. So it's not like necessarily that's an option that everybody has accessible. So in situations like that, if there was a way that I could avoid exchanges altogether, go into, a town near me and go to an ATM, I'd pay probably 10% over some random market fee because I'd know that I would get it right then. And I'd be able to have complete control over it instead of having to go through this huge rigmarole. In a world where there are lots of ways to buy Bitcoin, then I think you're probably right. Then it's a novelty. But in the world that we live in now, at least the world that I live in, this, I think that you could make a lot of money with fees on these.
Some people... I'm reconsidering completely my entire earlier position, and now I agree with what you said, Adam. In fact, I'm recalculating the benefit of having one of those machines. I think you're absolutely right.
There would be nothing to stop people, though, for instance, putting up an ad on local Bitcoins for a coffee shop where there is a Bitcoin ATM and saying, I'll sell it to you for 1% less than the ATM. It'll be localized, like it'll be different in different areas and different stores. That is a really interesting point, Adam. I mean, some people just don't want to deal with a person. Like they would rather deal with a machine, and they would rather know that they're going to get their Bitcoins. A machine can't like stiff you or screw you over on, on a Bitcoin deal.
Well, there's more recourse. Yeah,
exactly. And if there's an issue technically with it, you can always just talk to the proprietor of whatever store it's in. And so maybe people would feel more comfortable with that, and maybe they would be willing to pay a premium for it.
Stephanie, I would agree with you on that. Absolutely. I think the issue we haven't considered is the safety issue. When I was doing local Bitcoins, one of the things I did was I put in my ad that it was for new buyers only. I offered a safe and secure environment for people to buy Bitcoins in very specific places where I would meet. As a result, I think most, if not a lot of my buyers were young females who came unaccompanied by themselves to meet me to buy Bitcoins. I have a feeling that my ad was catering to people who were worried about this being a dodgy transaction.
Mm.
And that safety issue is quite serious. You know, obviously you don't want to be going out and doing Craigslist style purchases from strangers in places that don't have a lot of people around. So I think that's another big advantage of having a vending machine, which I hadn't considered. You know, so some people, for very, very good reasons, would be more comfortable with a machine.
But then it's kind of becomes like, why don't they just go on one of the exchanges? Well, I mean, it's difficult and arduous to set it up, but it's getting easier. And I think there are some exchanges that maybe are trying to make it easier, like Coinbase, and trying to make it more friendly to newbies and stuff like that. So I don't know, maybe one of these machines would be kind of like a gateway to opening more accounts on different Bitcoin exchanges. Not really sure.
Consider for a second the underbank, though. Consider the people who don't have bank accounts or PayPal accounts or easy ways of linking one of these exchanges. I mean, if I mainly have cash from a paycheck and I just want to, I don't know, buy $100 a month in Bitcoin, the leftovers from my paycheck that I only get in cash, I don't even have a bank account, then this vending machine would be perfect for me.
If it took debit cards, then it would be perfect for people who did have bank accounts or even prepaid debit cards, because a lot of people who don't have bank accounts do go with the prepaid debit card solutions that are out there too. So again, the possibilities are just endless.
I think this is not a situation that has one solution. I think that this is something that is even more local than local because it's also based on a person's preferences. You alluded to this earlier, Andreas. You know, some people would prefer to deal with real people. Some people would prefer to never see a real person. Some people would prefer to sit at home on their computer and are willing to wait. Some people hate waiting and, you know, want it fast no matter how they can get it. So really, I mean, what we're going to see is a broad swath of options that'll cover everything eventually. And the places that have fewer options, you'll have higher premiums there than places that have more options. But that higher premium is actually valuable because it's the higher premium. It's the fact that you can make 10% off of a Bitcoin vending machine that encourages people to say, okay, well, I'll sell it to you for 9%. And then and then you start that price war that moves it down. And so everybody, except for the original guy who spent the most on the equipment and got into the market first, they can make money in that situation, but they have to do it before they attract the competition. So the incentives are really good from where I sit.
That's an excellent point. If you want to enter the market for demand for Bitcoin that exists today and make some money off that, there's really only one way to do that, and that's by opening an exchange. So this offers a completely other way of doing it with a lot less regulatory burden that allows you to really start filling the needs of this market and start making money off making Bitcoin easier to buy.
Easier is relative here as always. And so, it's relative compared to setting up an exchange still. And again, this is a hyper-local issue too. In California, the rules about how you need to go about setting up one of these machines and licensing and all that jazz is much different than other parts of the world. So again, you just have to check into your local regulations to see if there's an opportunity here or not.
Yeah, I think this is all why I find it amusing when people talk about Bitcoin as a perfect means for buying drugs, because quite honestly, from my experience, it's actually a lot easier to buy drugs with dollars than it is to buy Bitcoin. So
thanks for sharing that, Andreas.
You're actually just doubling the amount of effort you have to make if you want to buy it with Bitcoin. First, you have to find someone who wants to sell you Bitcoin. Then you have to find someone who wants to sell you drugs. That's a lot of work.
So, Adam, you were saying a little earlier, if somebody can make like 10% profit by selling Bitcoins a very particular way in like a certain spot in a certain locality and from a machine, and these are the terms and conditions, this is the price, that's the market saying we support this method of Bitcoin vending, and any competition who comes in and wants to make a similar profit is going to have to offer the Bitcoins a similar way. Like they're going to have to present a package deal that's similar to what the person who's making 10% above spot is doing too. So this kind of market for how people want to buy Bitcoins is a way to find out information about what the best ways for Bitcoin buying are. You know what I'm saying? Like it tells us something. It tells us how do people most easily want to get Bitcoins.
It tells us something about the market, certainly, but I think that it's really dangerous to confuse the feedback we get from the real market as feedback that really is instructive to us, because what we have right now is such a constrained market where it's not so much about buyer preference as simply what options will work, what options are available, and what are the downsides of every option, relative to what your particular needs are. So yes, but also no. I mean, like if we had unencumbered markets, then you'd be totally right. But I just feel like you can't describe what we have now as unencumbered markets.
That's a fair point, but it also kind of reminds me of, take for example, local Bitcoins. There are people who sell Bitcoins online on local Bitcoins so that they have a potential customer pool of people anywhere. And the different methods of selling Bitcoins online, it's really interesting. There can be a price spread between them based on how convenient they are or how much people want to utilize them. So like, for instance, some people sell Bitcoins for cash in the mail. And that's something that a lot of people maybe feel a little bit hesitant to do, like, right, just put some cash in the mail and then this person says they'll send me some Bitcoins. That could be a tough sell. So sometimes the prices on that are very low. On the other hand, people also sell Bitcoins online on local Bitcoins for like Dwolla payment or Venmo payment or, even PayPal. And the prices are astronomical because there's a huge risk for the seller of getting closed down because all of those organizations are hostile to Bitcoins. They don't want people selling Bitcoins with their services, but yet there's a huge demand because people want to buy Bitcoins by just sending a PayPal or sending a Dwolla payment. Like, that's really convenient. So it is really interesting to me. I mean, I know we don't have a unfettered market and it's still small and we're still early in the game, but that information coming out is really interesting to me, and it shows places where there are holes in the service that's being provided to people and frankly, opportunities for entrepreneurs to fill those holes.
Thanks for listening to episode 41 of Let's Talk Bitcoin. Content for today's show is provided by Stephanie Murphy, Andreas M. Antonopoulos, and George Mandrick. Music was provided by Jared Rubens. If you can't get enough original thought and discussion, read our daily blog at letstalkbitcoin.com. Sign up for our weekly newsletter at theweeklybitcoin.com. To get in touch, send me mail at adam@letstalkbitcoin.com or visit letstalkbitcoin.com/talk to be directed to our listener subreddit. See you next time.